Hey guys, kinggath here with another patch for Sim Settlements. This is patch 2.1.8, which I'm calling Last of the 2.X's, which that does signal, if you remember from the Industrial Revolution launch, that the next patch will be the 3.0. Now, I don't have a guarantee on the date of that. It's not going to come in exactly 2 weeks necessarily. It will come out when it's ready, but this is the last patch I will be doing before the expansion comes out. So keep an eye out for information on the date on that. I hope to have the trailer out to you guys sometime next week. Okay, so let's get on to the changes that are in this patch. I will preface and say that primarily this is just foundational work, so a lot of the stuff in here is kind of prepping for the changes that are coming with 3.0. I feel like Sim Settlements is at a very stable place right now. Minimal bugs, and those that are remaining are pretty hard to replicate. So I want to make sure we have a nice, clean code base to roll back to, because inevitably with a major version change, I'm going to introduce tons of new bugs. So let's make sure we've got at least this version locked in time that we can come to if it's that bad. Alright, so let's get past the doom and gloom. Let's get on to the features I can show you guys. So the first thing you might notice is that everyone's favorite hoe is gone. Now that's not across the board. If you like the visual indicators, they are still on by default, but I did give an option to hide the what I call the occupied indicators. So there's the hoe, the sandwich board, the mailbox, and the time clock. So those are all contained under one option. You turn it on or off across the board. Those are, originally they were there so that you could clearly see that somebody was occupying a plot, but it occurred to me recently that just seeing that there's no for rent sign also tells you that, so there's no reason that that stuff needs to be there for players who don't like it. I know some players complained that it was awkward seeing the exact same mailbox on every single residential, for example, and some players didn't like the hoe because it would float depending on how you had your plot set up. So you now have the option to turn that off, and I'm going to show you that because that leads to our next change, which is a revamp of the holotape. Now, I am not going to update the video or documentation right away because there are a lot more things coming with the 3.0 patch to add to the holotape. So this is kind of prep work for that. And the reason is that the holotape was just getting daunting. I recently watched a video where someone opened it up and they were just like, I don't know what to do here. And I heard you loud and clear. It's too much for a new player to see that many options all at once. So I tightened it up. You'll see that now on the main screen there's just a few things. We've got the ASAM sensor info, which is just kind of an immersion flavor thing that I wanted to leave in. All of the zoning laws, audio options, performance, they're all now under the options heading. And then the two things that you would most likely be activating the holotape on the regular basis for are now easily accessible, which are the reports and tools. The one thing that's noticeably missing that I would like to add again is the help section. The help section was basically an immersively written explanation of the holotape. So it was written to be kind of humorous after a lot of the way that Fallout writing happens to show pre-war stuff where it was kind of authoritarian but ridiculous. It was written in that style. It was a lot of fun for me to write, and I think a lot of people liked it, but the problem was that the options it described didn't match the holotape at all, and to cover all of the options that are available would be quite the task, especially to find a way to make some of these seem like they're immersive. So for the time being, the help menu is gone, and instead I've actually described in plain English most of the options that were confusing when you change them. So if you toggle them to on or off, it will give you kind of a breakdown of how that option affects your gameplay. So let's go into the options menu. I want to show you guys some of the things that have changed the names. So configure zoning laws is now called gameplay options. Software settings is now called HUD options. The other three have remained the same. The one that is missing here would be local zoning laws. That's now under gameplay options with the rest of the gameplay stuff, which is the other section I'm going to show you because there's also a lot of changes here. Rather than just have a big pile of the different options you could change, it's now broken down into categories based on kind of what they do. I'm going to go over these real quick so that you guys have a rough idea of where to look for things. So if you're looking to change something, you can find it because the documentation is kind of out of date right now. So the first section here, advanced, that is all of the things you generally shouldn't touch. If you need to change something, For compatibility reasons, that's the type of stuff that will be under advanced. For example, the stockpile system is under there. Turning it off actually does you a disservice. It takes away a lot of gameplay options, gives you no benefit. But for some players, the stockpile just doesn't work. Nothing gets created. So turning it off can allow those plots to properly upgrade without having to collect anything. So the options in advanced, generally leave them alone unless you really understand some settlements, or if myself or somebody else helping you troubleshoot suggests you do so. All right, then we've got assignment. Those are all the auto assignment options. Difficulty will be things like dynamic needs, things that make the gameplay a little more challenging. Immersion are the things I added to Sim Settlements to kind of make it feel like a simulation, feel a little more realistic. So things like realistic build times, the commercial requirement for having customers, things like that are under immersion. All of the local options, so what was formerly called configure local zoning laws, is now exactly the same under local. So the local has a mix of some of all these different categories, but there's not a ton of them. I think there's a dozen, and those will only apply to the settlement you're standing in. All of the tax options are now called tax laws, and they are under here. And then upgrade handles things like turning upgrades to manual or automatic, stuff like that. Usability is a category that are things that are neither positive or negative. They're just kind of features that some people want to change to better suit the way they play. So there are things like auto-closing doors, the delay in building materials, so things that some players will like, some players don't, but you have the option to turn those on and off here. And then visual are all things that are aesthetic, so we've got turning off the ASAM sensors, the demolition effects, and the new thing that I was just showing you where you can hide the mailboxes, the hose, and the sandwich boards. That is this option here. Now keep in mind, if you change this to hidden, you will need to refresh your plots before those objects disappear. So there's a lot of changes to this holotape. There's a lot more coming, so I'm going to hold off on the video and documentation update until after the 3.0 patch. But for the most part, everything is the same as far as all of the laws have their names are the same. You can find them all buried inside of here. There are two laws that went away. Those are the all beds. I'm sorry, what are they called? Beds are homes and all work objects are jobs. Now the reason those are gone is that is now the default option of Sim Settlements. So if you build a bed, it will count towards your home meter there on the left. If you build vanilla crops, they'll apply to your jobs. So that way it's just real straightforward. You need to fill that meter by giving your people places to live and jobs to work. Ideally the system works better with plots, but I felt there's just those two options were not only confusing, but they kind of lent the idea that you were not supposed to play with vanilla things, which is not the case at all. You're definitely meant to mix and match, especially given the size of some settlements. Not every settlement can handle having a bunch of Sim Settlements plots in them, so I wanted to make that very, very clear that you were meant to mix and match. All right, now the last thing I can show you before we sign off on this patch note video is something I came up with after watching a few people stream. I noticed that the number of add-on packs has gotten so big that it can be daunting to choose a building plan. So let's say you come over, you see a house, and you're like, I really just don't like that model. And you just want them to pick a different one, rather than having to scroll through this giant list and try and guess what it's going to look like. And if you're going to like it, you can now just choose random. And then when you exit out, the settler will pick something new. Now, there is the chance that it'll just pick the same thing, but you'd have to have a pretty small building list for that to be the case. And if that is the case, you probably don't need the random feature anyway. But if you've got a giant pile of building plans, you just want something different, you can now just choose that random option, which should always be the first option when you go into the building plan selection. Okay, so that's it for things I can easily show you. As always, check out the patch notes. There are definitely things I've changed that weren't worth mentioning in the video, but you might want to know about them. And otherwise, guys, stay tuned for the imminent release of the next expansion pack to Sim Settlements. The trailer I hope to have out early next week, so today's Friday. We'll say by Monday or Tuesday you should have that. And then that will have the release date for the 3.0 patch and the expansion in it. Okay, guys, as always, take care and enjoy the mod.